Welcome to Living the Reclaim Life podcast. I'm Denisha. We're glad you're here for conversations that revive hope, inspire healing, and encourage you to live a vibrant life with Christ. So grab a cup of coffee as we chat with today's guest. Are there memories from your past that you keep locked away? I have those places in my heart where over the years I have shoved hard memories into those spaces and locked it down with what I imagine is a door with 10 deadbolts on it so it could never be opened again. But you know what? That didn't help me. What you're going to hear today is what finally helped me. And that was when God began to knock on that door, the one I wanted no one to know about, the one that I wanted to forget about. It was Him who brought safety, healing, and wholeness to those places of harm in my heart. And on today's episode, I am sharing part of my story that I don't often share, as I was invited to join Lynn Wyatt on her podcast, Girlfriend It. And before being on Patty's show, I binge listened to it, and it is awesome. So I encourage you to check out Girlfriend It on Apple Podcasts and subscribe and enjoy her show. It is great. So let's kick off today's episode with Patty, Placed with a Purpose.
This is Lynn Wyatt, and I will be your host today. And this is such an exciting show for me personally, because for those of you listeners, you hear me talking about my brother, and he is my person. And what's so fun about today is that this is one of my brother's besties, Denisha Werkeiser, and she is the president and founder of Reclaim Story, helping women reclaim their story after a painful past. And she's also the weekly podcast host of Living the Reclaimed Life. So I would strongly suggest running and subscribing to that podcast. But I also want to talk about that this, just like a quick disclaimer, what we're going into, if you're in the car with kids or have children around, we are going to be discussing just a more mature and very sensitive topic today. So little warning on that one. And with all of that said, I just want to say, welcome, Denisha. How are you?
Oh, Patty, I'm so good. Thank you so much for having me on. I love your brother, and he talks so highly of you. And so I'm super excited to be here with you today.
He doesn't have a choice, Denisha. He has to talk highly of me. Even though he's my older brother, I would definitely beat him up. That's just the way we roll. So it is actually interesting that I say that, because just the other day, I was having a conversation with some others that had, I'm the baby of 6, and they were talking about growing up that they would literally pound each other with fists and beat each other up. And I didn't grow up that way. Like, we never physically fought. And I don't really I don't remember arguing. And maybe my mom, if she was around, she would have a different story with that. But did you have like physical fighting in your household?
No. I think between our 18-year-old and 15-year-old now, when they were younger, they were 2.5 years apart, they would get physical. They would definitely get physical with each other. And sometimes my daughter I would have to stop my daughter from pounding on my son.
Okay, that's funny. That's funny. Well, you worked 20 years in corporate management before being an ordained pastor. And then you served as a pastor for 10 years, just following your calling. So what I'd love to hear today is just your story. What led you from 20 years in the corporate world to all of a sudden you became a pastor?
I know, right? Yes. So we're going to dial back here to those times. I worked in jewelry. I worked for K Jewelers for like over 10 years, and then started my own jewelry company with a girlfriend of mine. And that is still going 18 years later.
Wow.
And after, I'm so proud of her. And so our daughter was born, and I just really felt the Lord calling me to step out of the business. And so it was my best friend, right? We both had a second mortgage on our house to fund this jewelry business. And because to get a tiny little pad of rings, it's not a couple $100s. So we both have seconds on our house, and we're just, growing this business. And I felt like the Lord was saying, it's time. I'm going to take you out. And so I didn't say anything to her. I was terrified to tell her, hey, this thing we started? I kind of want out. And one night she said, Denisha, I want to take you to dinner. And our daughter had just been born. And so she took me to dinner and she says, I want, the business. And I said, oh, I want the business too. And she's like, no, I feel like God's telling me that I need to release you. And I was like, what? So isn't that cool how God did that?
Wow.
Yeah. So we ended up, I worked for her for a couple of years as she kind of bought me out, and then she's still running it. And it's been, a long time now. And I took a part-time job at our church at that time. And next thing I knew, years later, they were talking to me about ordaining me and making me a pastor. And so that's sort of how I fell into ministry, only God. And during that time, I had found out some family members that I didn't know on my dad's side, that I came from 9 generations of pastors. And I didn't know that until I was having am I qualified to do this? And then God brought my uncle into my life and told me, do you realize you're from 9 generations of pastors? I was like,
wow.
What? I wasn't raised in a Christian home. So I was like, wait, we're what? That was totally shocking to me. So that's how I landed in ministry.
Wow. Okay, so let's back up. You weren't raised in a Christian home, and I know you have this crazy, crazy story. I'm going to dive in there. We're going from working at the jewelry shop to I'm just going to ask you, what would be your deepest, darkest tragedy that has happened to you, especially since you weren't raised in a Christian home?
I would say for sure the death of my mom. My mom passed away when I was 23, and that was definitely the most tragic thing I had ever been through. My mom and I were super close, despite what you're about to hear in my story. We were super close, and that was very, very devastating for me. She passed away at 59, and I had just come to the Lord in 1988, and she passed away in 2001. So I was a baby Christian and just learning how to lean on God. And I was pretty mad at him, to be really honest. When she passed away, I thought, God, I believe you can do anything. I was telling people about Jesus in Target. When you first come to the Lord, it's like there's this just fresh, everybody needs to know him, right? And I pray that I can, that is revived years later. But so I think that was the hardest thing, is I didn't understand why she passed away. And at such a young age, that was definitely the most tragic thing.
Yeah. Well, you said, okay, we're super close, but yet it's going to be weird when you hear of what she did. So what were some of the things that took place that were the stepping stones into this, dual feeling here of the relationship with your mom?
Yeah. So when I was 8 years old, this man came into our life who was a family friend. And my mom trusted him wholeheartedly. Remember, I didn't grow up in a Christian home, so he was a psychic. And my mom was pretty big in business, pretty high-powered woman. And so she desired power, and that was a counterfeit power, if I'm honest. And so she began to seek his expertise as a psychic. She began to pretty much whatever he said would happen. And so they would just totally trust. And when I was 16, my mom somewhat turned me over to him. And it was to be trained up as an apprentice to him as a psychic metaphysic. And it was super intense. Later on, I found out that my mom did know kind of what was going on. He was 55. And so I have a 15-year-old, and I cannot imagine saying, I'm going to trust this, my daughter with, a 55-year-old man to go on different trips. And so we would go on different trips together. And the first trip was in Las Vegas that he took me to. And I was 16. And my mom didn't know at this point that there was going to be abuse or anything, but just seems like a natural, you just don't do that,
Yeah.
But my mom sent me with him. And I remember, he smoked a pipe. And so there was a constant pipe smell that to this day, if I happen to pass somebody smoking a pipe, I'm a little triggered, right? All my emotions get evoked. But I remember we went to Las Vegas and we stayed in this hotel that was way off the strip. Like it was kind of in the middle of nowhere, but not maybe like 20, 25 minutes away.
And you're 15 with a 55-year-old man.
16. Yeah. 16. Yeah.
16. Okay. You're 16. And what was the purpose of him bringing you there?
So he was training me. He was kind of pulling me away from home to spend time with me, to train me in metaphysics, essentially.
Okay.
And I remember walking, 16 years old in a casino. I remember walking through the casino and we went up to the room, and I don't know what I thought because I had trusted him, essentially. Now as an adult, I know he'd been grooming me and my mom since I was 8. Right. But I remember opening the door to the hotel room and seeing one bed and just thinking, whoa, at that point, I knew I was in trouble. I knew that, okay, wait, what's happening? I'm 16. I'm in another state. I don't even think I had my license at that time. Or if I did, I wasn't going to drive his car. Like I had no way to rescue myself.
Yeah.
And I remember I said, oh, where's the other bed? And he's like, oh, we'll just sleep in that one. And I remember thinking, I am in trouble. Probably after we unpacked and stuff, I remember looking out the window and seeing this like triangular parking lot and just staring at it and longing to like be out of that room, to be like in the parking lot in a car going somewhere else than where I was right there. And it was, that was, I think, a pretty heavy moment for me to realize that I wasn't safe. I wasn't safe with this family friend at all. And his intentions for that weekend weren't good.
Mm-hmm.
For 3 years, from 16 to 19, we went on different trips together, Arizona, different parts of California, Nevada. And every few months or so, I would go on a trip with him. And I remember the second trip that I went on with him, I remember I kind of stood on the car, like on the side of the car, and looked over the car at him. And I said, because it was physical, it was sexual, it was emotional and spiritual abuse in so many different levels, right? And I remember I stood on the side of the car and I yelled over the car. We had packed the bags and everything, and it was just like an expectation. I don't know why. Looking back, I'm like, I would never, gotten in the car the first time, but I was a kid and I did trust. And then I thought, well, maybe that was only one time that he was going to, do that. And so, okay, I'm going to trust. I remember standing on the side of the car and I said, I want you to hear me. None of that is going to happen again. Do you understand me? And he looked at me, he's like, just get in. And I just passively got in. I look back now and I'm thinking, I didn't tell my mom for 3 years. I didn't tell my mom. And I mean, I think when you're 16, I think at any age, that type of power,
Mm-hmm.
that type of control that I saw him activating, working, living in,
Mm-hmm.
it's appealing. It seems enticing. Now, obviously, as a Christian, as a believer, as a follower of Jesus, I realize that's the counterfeit.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the type of power and control that we want. Like that, we want to stay away from those things. But it was very enticing to me at 16. So there were so many different things pulling at me to tolerate what was happening.
Mm. So I do have to go back then at 16.
Yeah.
So that first night you were staring out at the parking lot going, okay, I want this. So there's a part of you that's like, okay, I have to get out of this situation. But then you go back to, there's a stronghold, there's this power. So there was this, okay, wow, here's this man that thinks I'm pretty cool and is trying to train me up, and he has all this knowledge and wisdom. So were you in a place of, I just have to give it over to him? Or were you in a place of, some of this might be exciting and intriguing?
Yes. I mean, unfortunately, but yes,
Yeah.
It was exciting and intriguing. Like I said, power and control. That's really what it boiled down to. We would go on the street and he would walk up to someone and tell them, I remember one particular woman he walked up to and he took something out of his wallet, wrote down an address and walked over to her and said, your son is at this address. And the woman just became unhinged because her son had ran away and he knew where her son was. And so moments like that, you build this like, okay, I can trust him, but yet this is happening, but yet, and I didn't understand the emotional abuse. He would also tell me things like, I know your mom. I understand what you're going through at home. I understand. And so there was a lot of manipulation going on there because I felt like nobody understood, but he seemed to understand. So there was like a history there. And it was fascinating to watch him walk up to people and kind of read their mail. I mean, that was fascinating. And it was also a fear tactic too. Right. So I'm 19 years old and I get a phone call and he said, if you don't go on a trip with me for 6 months. Now I was pulling away. I was trying really hard to pull away from 18 to 19. And he said, if you don't go on a trip with me for 6 months, you're going to be dead in 6 months. And I'm 19 years old. Right. And I'm thinking everything this man says happens. But I'd had just enough like gumption in that moment. And I remember it was one of those corded phones and I'm sitting on my bed, it's attached to the wall. And I said, I would rather be dead than go anywhere with you ever again. And I hung up the phone. And one of the things that I thought for so long was, if my mom knew what he was doing, she would kill him. Like she would, put him in jail. He would be, he would go away forever. Like there's no way my mom would have tolerated this. And so at 19, I went in and told my mom everything. And to be honest, she just kind of seemed kind of dazed, kind of like eyes glossed over. I really believe it was a spiritual thing in the moment. It was like she wasn't hearing me. Yeah. And she went and got a family Bible, which we were not faith-based. Like we didn't go to church rarely. I mean, with other people mostly, and if we did. But she went and got this big dusty Bible and handed it to me and said, you should go pray about if you're going to go with him or not. And I thought, what is happening? Now all of my safety kind of crashed at 19. And I mean, those 3 years were so hard. And I look back, like I have all my journals. I'm a total journaler. So I love to write down what I'm feeling, thinking, experiencing. And I went back into my journals and I never talked about anything. It was almost like I had disassociated with that world that he was taking me into and my normal teenage life. Yeah. So it was very interesting. But at that moment when my mom didn't respond the way for 3 years, I'd held this safe place that she would call the police and he'd go to jail, And when she didn't respond that way, my first thought was, I have to go. I got to get out of here. And so I did. I worked everything financially to be able to move out. And I moved out within 6 or 9 months after that. Yeah.
Okay. I'm hearing your story and I'm thinking, okay, the title of this episode was Placed with a Purpose. And I didn't know this part of your story. And so we just went on this whole path of you sharing this, 3 years of your life. But how does this go into Placed with a Purpose? Because I would be angry at God. And you said that there were times when you felt anger there. And yet you're super close with your mom during all of this. So unpack some of this, like why is this purpose in your life?
So all of that happened right when I was young. Now fast forward to 2017. Okay. I'm like 41 at the time. And I was in Las Vegas for a women's leadership retreat. I was on staff at our church as a pastor, and we go back to Las Vegas. I'd been to Vegas a bunch of times. Normally we were on the Strip. We always went to this women's conference. Well, this time there were 19 of us from our church. So we decided to rent an Airbnb. And it was about, 20, 25 minutes off of the Strip. And the first day we're driving to the conference, and I wasn't driving. I was sitting in the back seat, and I look over and we drive right by the hotel with the triangle parking lot. And in that very moment, sitting in the back seat of that car, I could almost smell his pipe. I mean, and I just had these flashbacks of like standing at that window, looking out, going, I just want to be out there. And now, fast forward, all these years later, and I'm out there this time. I'm a grown adult. I'm free. I'm away from him, everything that was that time in my life. but I was taken right back. I mean, I was 16, opened that door and realized there was one bed. I mean, it was right there sitting in the car. And I remember my first thought, the good old fight or flight trauma response, right? My first thought was, get out of the car. You got to go. You got to go. Yeah. And get out of the car when you're driving like down the highway, right? And so I sat there and I shut down. All my emotions shut down. And the people that were with me in the car, they were like, are you okay? I'm like, yeah. And I'm trying to sort out what just happened to me. I just got hijacked big time. So we get to this conference and it was at a church there, a big church, and worship started. And I started just sobbing. I'm ugly, snot, and I am really not a big crier in front of people. And we were with 19 people from our church, and I'm kind of leading the trip. I recruited all of them to come on, this is going to be great. We're going to get refreshed. Let's go do this. And I had to like get up and go like 10 rows back. And I sat during worship and I just sobbed. And during worship, those times, Patty, where you feel like the Lord is just speaking to your heart. And I so clearly in my heart, I heard, I'm reclaiming your body in the first place you lost it. And I remember just sobbing and thinking, no, God, this is a deadbolted door. There are 10 deadbolts on here. Like I've even tried to cement bricks to the front of it. Like we're not opening that door in my heart. That is a dark and shadowy place. And I don't want to open that. And I remember just thinking, why would you do this to me? Why would you take me here? But he was such a gentleman. My heart was like, I don't want to do this. We've locked this down. That was 16 to 19. I'm in my 40s. Like, stop. But he kept pursuing me. And I think of that song, Reckless Love, where it says, he chases me down, fights till I'm found. And that was what I felt like he did in my heart. And every breakout I went to at that conference, like one of them was on fear. And I literally was avoiding anything, there was nothing on like sexual abuse or a cult, but I was avoiding anything that looked like it or felt like it might be that breakout that could tip me and cause me to cry again. And so I went to one on fear. And I walk in a few minutes late because I was sobbing in the bathroom. And on the board, she has trauma written really big. Oh, and she's breaking down what happens, our trauma responses. And I'm no, I've got to get out of here now. I just wanted to leave everything. I went to one called Building Community. Doesn't that sound safe? Yeah. Do you know what they talked about? How trauma prevents us from building community. Like I say lovingly, Jehovah Sneaky was chasing me down, right? Like everywhere I went. So that conference, we ended that conference and there was a spoken word at the end. And she must have said the word reclaim like 20 times. It was Hosanna Wong. And it was amazing. And she was talking about reclaiming a place in her life that was hard. And here the Lord had just spoken to me that morning during worship. I'm reclaiming your body in the first place it was stolen. And so I became undone. So I believe that God placed me in Las Vegas at that trip, knowing he was going to go into those dark and shadowy places I've been hiding, saying like, I'm going to place you here, but there's a purpose for your pain. I'm not going to leave you in it. He didn't open that deadbolted door to leave me raw and like emotionally. Sometimes we feel if we pour into our past or begin to name things that have happened in our past, that it's like we're wearing a sweater with that thread. And if we tug it, we're going to end up vulnerable. Yeah. But I will say the best place to be vulnerable was with Jesus. And he met me in it. And he so gently went through and helped me through it. And at the end of that conference, my husband was coming to Vegas because we were going to spend a couple days together after the ladies left. And one of the things that I endured during the 3 years of abuse was he would take a Sharpie. And I know this sounds so crazy, but he would write his name on like my lower abdomen and kind of like where, as a woman, right, where our ovaries are. It was like a claiming that he was doing. And so what I did, kind of rebellious, but super healing for me. I know everybody has different views on tattoos, but I went and got a tattoo on that exact place that I remember him writing his name. And it has a tree. I love trees. It has a tree, and in the leaves are my kids' initials and our last name in the trunk. And then it says reclaimed. And then it has Romans 4:20 and 21 on the other side of the tree. And Romans 4:20, 21, it's Abraham. It's talking about Abraham. And it says that Abraham did not waver in unbelief regarding the promises of God. He was strengthened in his faith, gave glory to God, and was fully persuaded that God had the power to do what he said he could do. And that was what I was living out. I wanted to give glory to God. I wanted to be fully persuaded that God could heal, that God could restore. That word reclaimed means to rescue and restore. And that's what he was doing with my story. And that tattoo was super healing to me to just sort of take back that place that had been violated.
Wow, Denisha, what a beautiful, and not only that you've been able to reclaim that story. I mean, God reclaimed that story, but you did. So often we pray. My daughter and I'm actually staying at her house today, and we've been having these conversations. And she was talking about she listens to Kellen Lutz's daughter or wife, Brittany, and she was mentioning something about what you just said, how we take that hurt and that pain and we want to put it behind the brick wall. And when we do that, we also are putting the joy there. Like we can't fully experience joy when we have this padlock on our hurt, because we're so afraid someone's going to hear about our shame, or they're going to think you're not worthy. Yeah. And with that said, we only have a couple minutes before the show is over. And first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your story. And I could tell there was a couple times when I could hear your voice going there, kind of choking up, and to be able to fully just unpack it and throw up those words to us, because I truly believe that there is someone out there that will hear this and they will want that healing just like you did. I love that. You go into one room, it's on fear. You go into the other one on community. It's like, okay, God, these are supposed to be safe places for me to go. But if you could give one big gut wrenching tip, what would you say as we end the show today to help those people that just heard your story?
I would invite you to unlock that door that you have 10 padlocks on, the thing that you think is too far from God, whether it was done to you or something you did yourself. I would say that those are the places that we can trust God to come in and trust his process, that there is nothing too far from God's rescuing and restoring.
What a name for, this has kind of been in the last 5 years, maybe even 10 years. It's been about your story. Share your story, heal from your story, tell your story, listen to somebody else's story. But I love how you added just that one word. It's like reclaim the story, be able to truly give it to God to write that story. And so with that, we just want to thank you once again. Please subscribe to Girlfriend It. This episode was placed with a purpose, and we know that you were designed specifically for a purpose. And so discover your divine design.
I hope you enjoyed Patty and my chat today. To check out more of Patty's podcast, go to Girlfriend It on Apple Podcast. That's Girlfriend IT. We look forward to hanging out with you again next week as I interview Patty Lynn Wyatt and hear her story. We'll see you the same time, same place next week. Thanks for listening. I pray you found hope in today's conversation and maybe even feel a little less alone in your story. Stay connected with us on Facebook and Instagram at Reclaimed Story. Want to learn more about living a reclaimed life and how you can be a part of our growing community of reclaimers? Check out our website at reclaimedstory.com. All of those links and more will be in the show notes. And if you enjoyed this inspirational podcast, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. That is a huge help in helping us reach more people to live the reclaimed life. Thank you so much for listening.